Chapter 36. Kayla sat at the table closest to the dance area rubbing her feet. Their time on the dance floor had been fun, but brief. Miyako had gotten himself all worked up, and she'd sent him off with Taro to go deal with his little problem. Kayla was in the mood for something substantial, even more so after the dance floor had been mostly vacated after two dancers took the floor, and managed to upstage everyone. They needed the room, and their requested song choice just didn't have the right beat for the spastic gyrations of most of the clubgoers. Kayla wasn't sure how Syntholo had talked the DJ into it, but suspected Nelfrey's overall appearance played a pivotal role in the agreement. It would be easy to accuse her of having previous experience, but Kayla had seen them practicing earlier. Syntholo had taught Nelfrey to follow, not to dance, per se. Between his black fur with broad white stripes down his three lush fluffy tails, and her deep gray fur with gold and white accents, the duo looked incredible together on the dance floor. Syntholo led her in a simple tango that had captivated the other clubgoers. Kayla wanted to be happy for Nelfrey, who was enjoying herself but just couldn't get past her jealousy. She planned to put her shoes back on and hug her friend by the edge of the dance floor once the music wound down, but wasn't sure she could speak without sounding a little bitter. Between her and them stood the pretty male vulpine Nelfrey had selected for Kayla to approach earlier in the evening. Regardless of their passing resemblance to Syntholo, she felt like she'd be settling for second place if she did try talking to him. Worse yet, he too looked captivated by Nelfrey. She looked up toward the watchtower. No matter how the night ended, it was nice to know she'd made a new friend, and new possible allies among the Karzon. She was starting to look forward to the journey ahead of her. Lubarth hadn't predicted this. Some things were starting to become clearer to her. Phantom Hound had been involved with Loric's rise to power as founder of the Mercantile Marines. If what Vakir had said was true, they chose the lesser of the two brothers because that's what suited Project Acorn's agenda. They could have helped liberate the Karzon, but all they wanted was Baron Deloric. Knowing he and his first mate were going to be betrayed, they stopped her from intervening, and just let it happen. The Cletharians had interfered with the Dareth back when Veshtaka was still alive, which may have something to do with why Kayla had been a valid candidate for the Queen's Mark. Lubarth was there. Acorn had refused to assist the Dareth. Was this part of his plan to reduce the influence of Cletharia in his desired future? They called on the ancient species to deal with the Wraith planetoid, only to turn their back on Cletharia. In one of his messages, it was clear he had expected Kayla to meet with her aunt and accept some position at the heart of the alliance. They wanted the power of Cletharia and expected her to be wielding it for them. They were in for a rude awakening. Kayla was done playing the part of the obedient pawn. If she made it to the other side of his playboard, and became a queen. The song was ending. Kayla slid her shoes back on and worked her way to the railing at the edge of the dance floor. She wouldn't have made it in time if Kiryu hadn't seen her approaching. Kayla's black tail shot through the onlookers, and wrapped around the short, stocky, white, caiman's hand. Her tail wiggled and squirmed, encouraging people to get out of the way as she took her place next to her friend, watching the dancers together. Kiryu elbowed her in the ribs, motioned toward the vulpine, and then made a lewd hand gesture. Kayla blushed and shrugged noncommittally. A surprised gasp filtered through the assembled onlookers. Kiryu pointed and giggled. While guiding the body back and forth, she'd failed to interpret his movements and had slapped him in the face. The amount of force was intensified by the momentum as he moved her back in the opposite direction. The look in his eyes held a ferocious intensity that Kayla wouldn't have expected from steady, reliable Syntholo. If she were to guess what emotion he was feeling, it would be lust. Syntholo braced his body against Nelfrey for just an instant, then spun her around the floor, holding her by one hand. He leaned forward as if he were intending to kiss her, and then the music faded out with the two of them just a few feet from Kiryu and Kayla. "I'd break all my vows for you," Nelfrey gasped. Syntholo dropped her. The onlookers went from stunned silence to laughter the moment she hit the floor. Sin Tholo stormed off the stage as a bewildered Nelfree, still trembling, rose to her feet. Kayla and Kiryu jumped the railing and rushed to help Nelfree up and off the dance floor. "I've got her," Kiryu insisted once they made it to the bottom of the stairs. "Just keep any of those lecherous slobs from following us. You may not be able to smell it, but I can." Kayla was about to ask her what she was talking about, then noticed Nelfree's fur and outfit was damp with sweat. "Do you want me to have the guards escort you to the elevator?" "They don't do that," Kiryu scoffed. Kayla raised her black tail above her, with its stinger fully extended, and assumed an offensive Jitado combat stance, and started loudly counting down from 10. By the time she reached 4, 3 guards, including Fatal, had surrounded her. Callie lowered her tail, leaned against a bar stool, and said, "Would you mind walking my friends to the elevator?" The massive wolf growled angrily. 2 of the guards spoke with her friends briefly in the bestial trade language, then headed off with Nelfree and Kiryu while Fatal stayed behind to glare at her for a bit longer. "Don't worry," Kayla chuckled, "I'm shipping out in a couple hours." "Good," Fatal growled before stalking off. Long after the guard had vanished into the crowd, Kayla still felt like she was being watched. She'd gotten used to being observed by the guards, and there was no sign of the Cayman with binoculars near balcony 2. The guys in room 6 had been watching the bar area, maybe it was just that. With her mental abilities out of commission, she felt a little on edge. She took a seat on a stool by the corner of the bar and let her mind wander. The galaxy was a busy place, and so many things just weren't part of the news cycles. Until today, she hadn't known about the struggles of the Karzon. She had a year to learn more before her next time meeting with Jerem and her freedom fighters. When Kayla had gone to the meeting which heralded the founding of the Alliance, there were a few others that had been represented there that she'd heard nothing about since. What became of the diminutive insectal Xynon, or the spider-like Icarian fugitives that had escaped the destruction of their primary hatchery world? Maybe this is the real reason those like Labarth and Aisha are able to gain so much power and authority. It's nearly impossible to get a good look at the big picture with so many moving parts. The Ravenhawk clones had their own way of predicting events, but there were about a dozen of them, with one embedded in most major factions. She was here to relax, but there was just no way for the living to really escape from their own lives. "Interesting mask," someone said somewhere behind her on her right. Kayla coiled her black tail around her hips but didn't respond otherwise. "Mind if I sit?" the male-sounding speaker said. "Seat's empty," Kayla said softly. "That was a pretty intense dance earlier," he said. "Are they friends of yours?" "Why?" Kayla said irritably, finally turning toward him. It was that vulpine with pretty fur. Selection number 1, Nelfree's pick. He must have been watching while she was walking with Kiryu and Nelfree. "I'm a dance instructor," the red-furred canine with black fur on his forearms and face said. "I've done choreography, and she impressed me. I was hoping to get her contact information." Kayla smirked. There was a fair chance he'd heard what Nelfree had said to Syntholo. It seemed fair to assume the Vulpine's interest in Nelfree went as far as a casting couch. "Let me give it to you straight," Kayla smiled disingenuously. "If you're not an ancient archaeological site, not covered in writing in a long-dead language, or in the hospital for life-threatening injuries, you're..." "Oh, what was that expression my other friend used earlier? Barking at the moon?" "She's brilliant and had around 2 hours of instruction before hitting the dance floor. I can't imagine you have much to offer her." "I'm a wealthy and famous dance trainer. It would be a shame to deny someone who has so much natural talent an opportunity to blossom. She'd be fantastic on stage or screen. Would you deny her that?" "Wealthy," Kayla snickered as she motioned over to the bartender, and asked him to bring her their most expensive bottle of Navrau red mead. It cost too much to be covered by her room tab, but she suspected she wouldn't be drinking it, and expected to need it to make a point. "I'm not paying for that," the Vulpine snickered. You didn't ask me to buy you a drink, and if I did, it wouldn't be overpriced. I don't remember asking, Kayla smiled playfully. Is this some sort of scam you two run? The Vulpine scoffed. No, Kayla said dismissively, as she waited for the bartender to have the bottle brought out of storage. It's a bit funny, really. We were all sitting up in my room earlier. I thought it would be interesting trying to go interspecies, so each of us picked someone for me to try approaching. My friend picked you. Not for herself, but for me to try talking to. I thought you were pretty, so I didn't object. He looked disgusted. You'd have to be really talented on your knees if I were to even consider. The sound of the bottle being placed on the bar interrupted him. Kayla waved her wrist past the credit scanner, and shushed the bartender before he could thank her by name. Once the bottle is opened, the bartender informed her, no refund will be possible. Thank you, Kayla said as she braced her thumb against the cork and turned her attention to her pretty, yet obnoxious, companion. What were you saying? I'll tell you what, the Vulpine leered. I'll consider having sex with you if you give me her contact information and spend a solid hour on your knees sucking my. Kayla popped the cork and slowly started pouring the 22.3 Galcred bottle of rare, aged, alcohol in his lap. What are you doing? He barked as he jumped away from his seat. Marinating it, Kayla grinned as she stopped pouring, and that's as wet as you're getting tonight. Sin Tholo, come to the bar and snag the rest of this overpriced booze from me, Kayla transmitted. Bring it to Nelfree as an apology. When I bring you, and you drop her, I'm also responsible for her being dropped. Stupid expensive, but worth every drop. Kiryu, what is it? 100-and-something-year-old Navrao read about 20 GC a bottle, Kayla transmitted. Just don't spill it. Kiryu, I hope that isn't just for Nelfree. Once the Vulpine had stormed off, most likely to try and get what looked like a blood stain of his pants, Kayla grabbed some napkins off the counter and wiped off the empty stool next to her. Nelfree, you don't mind if I let her try it, Callie? Sin Tholo, I don't think we could keep her from it. Kayla giggled as she handed the bottle off to Sin Tholo and waved him on his way. As he walked away, it crossed her mind that she hadn't bothered to try it. At that price, she was probably better off not knowing if she liked it. The problem with suddenly having a great deal of money, which she'd done nothing to earn, seemed to be a complete disregard for what that kind of money represented to those less fortunate. The Karzon Resistance had spent a year saving the funds to rent the watchtower. She'd just thrown away more than 100 times that amount for her own amusement. Kayla turned her attention to a small display screen built into the bar counter and started reviewing their beverage selections. Each listing had more information available when selected. Some beverages were unavailable for sale to some species due to potential deleterious effects, others had cautionary notes about more interesting side effects from the ingredients or distilling process. Naturally, there was even a notation indicating drinks that would affect Udbar, which are highly resistant to most toxins, including most forms of alcohol. Kayla scolded herself silently for not noticing there was a sorting feature. She selected weak or no alcohol and then selected beverages that affect moods. She was a bit surprised they had the brown variety of coffee that was toxic to so many species. One of the heads of Acorn, Vorshana, was addicted to the bitter drink. Kayla suspected the green-haired woman had bribed them to keep it in stock. That sounds interesting. Kayla blushed brightly and bit her lower lip as she read, this proprietary aphrodisiac increases sexual pleasure, performance, and arousal. Kayla doubted it was half as effective as the description implied. It even stated that it had to be drunk at the bar when ordered to prevent anyone from being dosed with it. It was a heck of a sales pitch. The beat of that song through her tail was all the encouragement she needed to be bold enough to climb on Miyako. But despite their awkwardness, there was no ambiguity about what they both wanted. If this stuff was anywhere near as potent, the listing implied it could shatter her inhibitions. Even if it is just a placebo, maybe it could embolden her and give her the confidence she lacked. "I'm considering trying Cool Eye Surprise," Kayla transmitted as she called over the bartender. "Kiryu, do it." "Sin Tholo, that's a bad idea." "Kiryu, do it." "Nelfree, what is it?" "Kiryu, do it." Kayla was too embarrassed to say it aloud. She just pointed out her order on the list to the bartender, as any possible dissent was drowned out by a stream of Kiryu chanting, "Do it," filled their group chat. The bartender walked over to a mirrored case built into the back wall of the top shelf of the bar. As he opened the case, the bar was illuminated by a pale magenta light. A single row of narrow test tube-like vials glowed brightly from within the case. Trying to be secretive about what she'd ordered was not an option. She felt like everyone was watching her even before the vial was removed from the case. "Does everyone have to fucking know?" Kayla unintentionally transmitted. The bartender spread out a strip of black cloth, the tube of liquid on top of it, then rolled the cloth around it, smothering nearly all of the light, and waited. Kayla glanced around the room. There were plenty of people who were suddenly interested in the bar, but they were watching the bartender and had no idea who'd ordered the drink. Most of the observers had lost interest by the time one of the Myco guards walked up and sat by the side of the bar. It wasn't Fatal. This one was a female with white fur. The write-up said it had to be drunk at the bar. That must be why they were here. Kayla wasn't sure if she should feel relieved. The messages over her communicator had stopped entirely. They were probably up in the room arguing. Kayla watched the bartender walk over to where she was seated, the large white wolf walking in tandem with him. Anyone who had seen this drink ordered before would know it was her if they bothered to pay attention. The cloth wrapped around the container of fluid had subdued the glow, but the bartender's last stop and the guard would be a dead giveaway. Miyako was a decent guy, so she had no regrets about what she did with him. He was alien on the outside, but his personality was warm and familiar. She was attracted to Sin Tholo as well, but was that really a matter of appearance, or who he was inside? She'd been approached by that Udbar earlier, instinctively dodged more than one attempt to grab her ass. Then there had been that Shamfarian from the salvage ship, and the Vulpine. Was the drink a way to increase her confidence or reduce her standards? She'd asked Thallo about her attraction to Baron Deloric. She insisted she'd never done anything with him, but had thought about it because he was always a gentleman and made her feel like a woman. As flawed as Shinji is, he does care. How much of her motivation was retaliation against social norms, wanting someone as far removed as possible from the likes of her brother, or wishing she could have the sort of passion-filled experience Cyanide enjoyed with Talshi? An uncut pygmy Karzan from one of only 2 clans known for that mutation, so far from home, on an occasion when the one man she was allowed to sleep with was fated to die. Who would have ever thought? Wait, what were the chances of that? There were too many people pushing around pieces in this bizarre future predictions game, and old Phantom Hound was far too good at it. Lorik and Vakir. 2 nearly identical brothers, close enough to distort any predictions made by anyone who didn't know exactly what to look for. Lamentic law was ridiculously convoluted, and they had their own oracle influencing the nation's rulings. Neither Talshi nor Cyan were put to death for their actions that day. The High Court's decision to wipe out the Karzan species entirely, just to keep their secret, was a real possibility. Kayla needed to get better at deciphering puzzles and anticipating the predictions. She was confident nobody would have predicted her appearance here tonight. The knack suppression field may even thwart some attempts to uncover plots. The systems bordering Karzan space were controlled by Lupians, Cayman, and Gorgalians. Orchestrating the fall of the Karzan would provide an opportunity for the canine species to expand their sphere of influence. Def Corp was currently managing the area, but who was pulling their strings? It wasn't the old Clotharian Queen or Aisha or Labarth. Ruku Har and his Ravenhawk clones maybe? Considering the proximity of Najrak in relation to the Carmel system, if she was right about who was in control of Def Corp, Ruku Har was most likely responsible for both the attack on the Nautiloid and the refugee colony. The bartender laid the wrapped vial and a tablet on the counter in front of her. Kayla glanced down at the unsigned waiver of liability. "Sorry, I've changed my mind. I have work to do. Can you bring me a cup of coffee, the Terran-only variety?" She preferred the normal green coffee, but the old brown variety was a stronger stimulant, and rarer due to cultivation issues. Kayla apologized for wasting the guard's time as the bartender returned the Kulai surprise to storage and looked for an available table near the elevator to the watchtower while waiting for her drink. If this really was one of the few places in Corrales where her actions would be concealed, it was time to make her first real move to interfere with their game of fate. When the Watchers forget to see, light a match and burn that tree, Kayla mused inwardly. For a split second, Kayla thought she saw a faint radiance emanating from her black stripes. That's not a verse, Kivaza thought back from the depths. It is now, Kayla thought back as she wondered whether or not the glow had been entirely in her imagination. Nobody seemed to notice it. Once the bartender returned, she exited out of the chat group, picked up her drink, and headed to an open table near the watchtower elevator. She stroked the top of her communicator, and renamed Miako's entry from Cat Fancy to Good Kitty, then composed a quick message asking him to pass on a message to Vakir, letting him know she needed to talk with him, and that she would be sitting near the elevator. Kayla's next message was sent to Tyrell up on the ship asking him to send her the coordinates of that IS ship and everything he could find about Def Corp in the Carmel Major region without using her security access key. She also wanted an idea of what had become of the Merc Marines after Deloric vanished. If Gekru took control, he was in for a rude awakening, once she started putting her own pieces into play. Giving the Karzon a top-of-the-line IS starship, and the location of that communications tower wasn't going to be enough. They were going to need a way to subvert factory production so they could build what they needed to force Def Corp out of their region. If she could get them the backing of a group like the Merc Marines, or some other faction. While classified as a minor faction due to only having one known system under their control, Baron Deloric had united the vast majority of privateer fleets. Their combined military might was comparative to many of the major powers. Through his charismatic intensity, a cult of personality formed with Deloric at its core. The likelihood of anyone else being able to steer the faction was unlikely. If Vakir could play the part well enough, he may be able to guide those most loyal to the legacy long enough to appoint a worthy successor. In the meantime, he could direct them to disrupt key supply lines. Kayla smiled and watched as the elevator door opened and Vakir stepped off. She caught a quick glimpse of Te-Aro behind him before the white pygmy Karzon darted off toward the bar. She waited for him to get settled in the seat across from her, grinned, and asked, "How do you look in a pirate's hat?" "I already told you," Vakir snorted, "I don't have his silver tongue." "You don't need to," Kayla grinned. "I'd prefer if you didn't have to speak at all. I know who you're working with. Is there a secure way for me to pass you information or funding?" She could hear a faint jingling sound as he reached into an inside coat pocket and took out 3 rings. He chose one with a faceted sapphire cabochon. It would look like a class ring from a distance. She held the ring near her pendant to temporarily link the devices. The ring wasn't associated to any personal identification. The chip inside the synthetic stone was a storage device, and could easily be disposed of or replaced. It wouldn't allow her to send him messages in the future, but as long as her pendant was linked and within a few feet of the ring, she could transfer information into it as needed. There was limited storage, but it was currently empty. She placed it in the middle of the table between them, so she could transfer files while they talked. "My helmsman is a cyberpath and a bit of an overachiever. I'm sending the coordinates to that ship, along with all the scans taken of it," Kayla said. "It's an unregistered model, possibly a prototype. You should have some people you can trust examine the technology. A team would be faster. Lucky for me they wanted me attacked or I wouldn't be sitting here today." You said intact, Vakir noted. So, an easily identified corpse for proof of death? I can't be sure, Kayla shrugged, but I suspect there's something in my head they were after. Anything else? You'll probably have to burn through the hull to take the ship, and Tyrell, my helmsman, recommends bringing an auxiliary computer core to bypass their main computer, Kayla said. I know they have boarding pods, so keep that in mind. They could come in handy later. That sounds costly, Vakir grumbled. If you need help with that, Kayla sighed, I have Miyako's contact information. I'll route what you need through him. Just let me know. Are you noting this on there? Vakir asked while motioning toward the ring. Just did, Kayla smiled as she sent another request up to her ship. While I was in the Nairobi system, I paid a visit to that communication tower. I'm adding a file including the schematics and replacement software to run it, along with a clean encryption key, Kayla said as she took a moment to thank Tyrell. The Carmel system is less than a jump day from here. Do you know if they're using the slipstream to maintain supply lines to Karzon space? Miyako can provide freighter numbers when he's working. That's a start, Kayla sighed. I need a lot more information on Def Corp, but I need to make sure this can't be traced back to me, yet. So, for now, I'm restricted to publicly available information. What can you tell me? We build and crew most of the ships that patrol our systems. The software won't allow us to fire on ships designated as friendly. Attempts to override the software ends badly. We learned that the hard way. We lost a lot of good people that day. We're pretty sure there's a failsafe built into one of the components which are assembled elsewhere and shipped in. If you could isolate what hardware it is, you could cause some real chaos. Boarding pods, for ramming. There may be a way to exploit that. You remind me of my brother, Vakir chuckled softly. He had no aversion to cheating to win. I'd always criticize him because life doesn't have cheat codes. Except when it does, Kayla grinned. That scenario we spent an entire year trying to beat, he grumbled, it was easily resolved the moment we stopped thinking like Karzon. Our people are too prideful to surrender, and too honorable to cheat. We beat the damn thing by doing both, coordinating fleet movements with stealth ships and surrendering to the final wave as those stealth ships make their escape. I never felt content with that, but maybe my brother was right. As long as our enemy can call on the Wraith, we can never truly win. Well then, Kayla grinned. It's a good thing it's out of play. Cletheria took it down the day the alliance was formed. The big players didn't let that tidbit of news spread too far. Are you sure? Vakir scoffed. I was there, Kayla grinned. In fact, one of her selves had attended the meeting and saw it on screen, while her other self saw it in person. Cletheria is unpredictable, and serves no one, Vakir growled. We now know how to defend ourselves from them, but the planetary security agreement we signed with Def Corp has made slaves of us all. Is that what they tell you? Kayla laughed. Cletheria is just a scapegoat. Someone orchestrates an attack then comes to the rescue against a contrived foe. Just claim it was Cletheria, move to the next system, and repeat. Vakir opened his mouth to object, but Kayla spoke before he got the chance. The Cletherian rampage never happened. The Lamentix blew up the star at the heart of Eldorani space, not Cletheria. I suppose you were there to see that too, Vakir mocked. Kayla smirked. Actually, in a manner of speaking, she was, but there was no point in mentioning it. The Cletherians were active in Dareth space at the time, Kayla shrugged, and the closest thing to an actual rampage started and ended with the fall of the Torgalian Empire. The what? The who, actually, but they've been extinct for a long time now. Let's get back to worrying about the living. Vakir chuckled and nodded. I don't know what kind of resources you have at your disposal, but if you have access to facilities that design ships, I may have an idea. Not yet, Kayla admitted. I could afford to hire a design team, but I'd be concerned about the scheme being unveiled and countermeasures being put in place. Let me know what you're thinking and I'll see if there's anything I can do to make it happen. No promises. I told you my brother liked to cheat. Suicide runs were effective in the scenario, but far too costly. He programmed in what he called slashers that could slice into enemy hulls without being damaged. I don't know if this would be possible with a real ship, but they worked well in the simulator. We'd need a way to disguise their real function while building them. Never mind. I'm being too ambitious. Maybe, but I'll remember the idea. Kayla smiled reassuringly. I'll let you know if I have any useful ideas, Vakir snickered. You're the strategist, but you're going to need more help than I can offer, Kayla said. Support from the Mercantile Marines sabotaging supply lines, or some other group, should help get Def Corp out of your system faster. I think I may know how to get them involved if you're willing to employ a bit of deception and use your brother's legacy to your advantage. What do you propose? Once you've taken that ship, Kayla grinned broadly, dress like your brother did, make sure any ships you contact can see you sitting in the command seat. Have someone else do all the talking. Never say a word. Make sure your crew calls you Baron, and let conspiracy theorists and rumors take care of the rest. Vakir smiled and nodded. So let others lie for me? The difference between lying and storytelling is remembering the truth. The first telepath we come across will sense the lie and it'll be all over. Not if you use Baron as your new code name, then everyone is technically telling the truth. The people who were most loyal to your brother are most likely unwilling to believe he's gone. Let them build their own fiction, and with any luck, they'll flock to your side. I'm growing concerned, Vakir said cautiously. If this works out, then what? Are my people to become your personal army in exchange? Kayla giggled. We can't sign any binding treaties until you're recognized as a nation. Just promise me to keep the negotiation quick and simple. Oh, and make room for refugees if I can't find a way to prevent the destruction of Hyrule about 2.5 years from now. Vakir sat blinking, silently processing her words. I expected this to take decades. You think this can be accomplished in so little time? Kayla reached across the table and rested her hands on top of his. You talk like there's a choice for either of us. It has to. If we fail together. Are you with me? Vakir chuckled softly. Who's talking like there's a choice to be made this time? Kayla finished transferring data, gave him back his ring, and wished him a safe journey. What's the best way to end a war? Kivaza goaded from the back of her mind. Something about a woman spreading her legs, Kayla thought back as she made her way back to the bar with her empty coffee cup. She rested the cup on the edge of the bar and took one last look around the room. The night hadn't been a waste even if she hadn't actually found what she came here looking for. Te-Aro was sitting at the far side of the bar talking to another feline. They were shorter than she was, and their features were narrower. Te-Aro's features made her look like a miniature Tarzan, but the person speaking with Te-Aro was either a Cheshire or a pygmy that could pass for one. Miyako could probably be passable if they trimmed his fur right, but he was a bit too tall to be convincing. The gray-furred felinoid speaking with Te-Aro was taller than a typical Cheshire, but not so tall to seem anomalous. Has everyone finished off that bottle yet? Kayla transmitted. I think I'm going to give up on my initial quest. Kiryu, we have to do this again. Nelfree, you're a bad influence on everyone. Kiryu, I try my best. Sin Tholo, we'll meet you downstairs. On her way to the elevator, she was intercepted by the gray feline who thrust a study leather tail brace into her hand and then darted off without a word.